up sheet, and as you come through the door to your right on that desk, put your name and address there, and you'll be contacted on it if you're requiring any further information. Some of you in the audience may be here interested in the Kelsey application on Bobby West Street. That application has been withdrawn and will not be heard this evening. So if there's anyone here to hear that, you're not going to hear it tonight. Attendance has been taken. All members are present. Does anyone have any additions to the agenda? Member Miller.
Two very brief items under other business, Mr. Chair.
Anyone else with an addition to the agenda? See no one else seeking approval of the agenda. Moved by Member Pierce, seeking a seconder, seconded by Mayor Bailey. All those in favor? Opposed? Is carried. There are no delegations listed tonight. Does anyone have a pecuniary interest? Please do so now or at the appropriate time when it comes up. Seeking approval of the minutes of the previous meeting. Moved by Member Pierce and seconded by Member LaFerrier. Anyone have any questions or comments on those minutes? Call the approval. All those in favor of the minutes? Opposed? They're carried. Does anyone have any business arising from the minutes? Member Bell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Two things. We had a protracted debate about the protocol for towers and whether we were applying it properly and whether it was proper for us to only go through one public session. I understand from planning department that a note is being prepared and will be submitted at the next meeting. Perhaps through staff, I could, to you through staff, I could ask that question for confirmation. Yes, that's good. Thank you, because we will have more towers to approve as we go forward. Second thing, we had a little spat with one of the public speakers about the time that was allowed for him or her to speak. I think the clerk has clarified that 10 minutes is the limit. And I guess it's up to us as council if we wish to give that individual longer than 10 minutes, as is normal practice.
That's correct. If someone wants to go beyond, it comes back to committee to approve extension.
Thank you.
Member Chambers?
There's a little bit of unclarity with that comment with regard to delegations. The procedural bylaw does apply, as the clerk indicated in the memo, but I believe the procedural bylaw is perhaps silent on input from the public on public hearings. There's two different things.
Mm-hmm. We'll put it in the emphasis on the chair to deal with that situation if the situation arises. Anyone else have any business arising? Seeing no one? Then we'll move on to public hearings under the Planning Act to receive information. And the first one is A, David and Tracy Blackwell at 226 Langford Church Road, ZNB 827-19-DN, and we'll ask our planner, Dan, to present.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Planning staff have received a application for to amend the zoning bylaw for a property located at 226 Langford Church Road. The applicants are the Blackwells and the agent is Howard Snodgrass Consulting, and staff are recommending that the item be received for information purposes only. The subject lands are located at 226 Langford Church Road on the north side of Langford Church, just west of White Swan. The property has a total frontage of approximately 1,000 meters, a depth of 250 meters with a irregular shape and an area of approximately 14 hectares. The official plan currently designates the entirety of the subject lands rural residential with some natural heritage. And we know that the intent of the rural residential designation is to recognize existing concentrations of large lot residential development in order to prevent scattered lands consumption, inefficient use of existing infrastructure, and non-farm development within the agricultural, or in the agricultural designation. The current zoning on the property is agricultural, again, with areas identified as natural heritage. The applicants are proposing to rezone a portion of the subject lands from agricultural to rural residential, and this is essentially to create or to facilitate a subsequent application for consent to create one residential lot. As part of the submission, the agent provided a cover letter outlining the details of the report, or details of the application, including the rezoning and severance, the drawings submitted with the application, as well as a minimum distance separation review, which identified required distance from a nearby livestock facility of 260 meters. Some key considerations at this point. Staff are reviewing the policies as they relate to provincial policy, as well as official plan as it relates to guiding development, where development is permitted within the rural lands. The initial planning response, which has been shared with the applicant, is that the application as proposed does require a holistic approach. Staff identify that the subject lands are quite large and are fully designated, so we need to identify what the development potential is on the property and what the full build-out of that property does look like. And this would consider servicing to determine what the development potential and lot size configuration. Staff and the committee is well aware that there are often concerns with water in the area, so it is important to review not only for this lot but for potential lots, additional lots, that there could be adequate water supply in both quality and quantity of water, and that study would essentially determine how many lots could be supported on these lands. It's also important to identify what the phasing and the timing of the lot creation does look like. We like to take, in the planning department, a holistic approach rather than a piecemeal approach, rezoning the entire subject lands and identifying what the full development does look like, and that any development should consider existing and expanding agricultural related uses. In terms of next steps, we'll continue to receive comments from staff and review those comments and share them with the applicant, where we will essentially prepare a formal report with a recommendation where further notice will be provided to surrounding residents with notice of the next public hearing where the formal recommendation will be presented by staff. At this point, I'll be happy to take any questions.
Any member of committee with a question of our planner? Member Gatward?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The 250 meters that you stated, does that meet MDS requirements from the livestock operation? And what type of livestock is in that barn?
Through Mr. Chair, I can provide a brief response, and then I'll let the applicant or the agent provide more details. The graphic shown on the plan does identify a general radius, and this is conceptual at this point. There's no general accuracy to what's drawn, but it would identify that 260 meters and how the black dot would identify the required location of a dwelling. So the livestock, I believe it's a horse farm operation, and I'll let the applicant speak more to the details and the numbers and how the calculation was generated.
Thank you.
Any other member of committee with a question of our planner? Seeing none, I'll ask the applicant or the agent. Oh, Member Coleman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Will this application be sent on to the Agriculture Advisory Committee? Because it is agricultural land. So I just want to know if the Agriculture Advisory Committee has commented, or will it be sent on so they can have a comment?
Through Mr. Chair, the lands are currently designated agricultural, but however, the current use on the lands are clearly being actively farmed. The application or the proposal has not been circulated to the Ag Advisory Committee. However, if the committee wishes, we can certainly consult with our Agricultural Advisory Committee.
Anyone else? Seeing none, then I'll ask the applicant or the agent of the applicant to come forward and make a presentation. When you arrive, state your name, address, please. Howard Snodgrass, address is on the file. Proceed when you are ready, Mr. Snodgrass.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, committee members. With reference to the overhead, some of it's duplicated with what Dan has already alluded to, so I will try to be brief. The subject lands are as indicated here, and the family also owns an adjacent property. The two properties together are almost 100 acres and are actively farmed. The applicants are tied in with a family out there by the name of Matthews. Actually, Tracy Blackwell is third generation Matthews, so they are a long-established farm operation. The questions that came up regarding MDS, the horse farm here where the red pointer is, we dealt with an adjacent or with another severance back a year and a half ago or so. But the long and short, it is a horse farm with approximately 16 horses, and there are presently 2 residences that are in closer proximity than the proposed residence here on the Blackwell. And likewise, there is another potential building lot here that was approved by the committee and the Committee of Adjustment for the Harrison Horse Farm, because it is also designated residential or rural residential. Now, when you look at the maps, it looks like the lot is located in the center of an agricultural field, which it is, but we have provided staff with a hypothetical location of 2 additional residential lots to the east of the subject proposed lot. Each of these lots would be over 1 hectare in size because the arc of the MDS touches through or goes through both lots. Now, one of the main things that we're trying to get across to the committee and to staff is we're only proposing 1 lot. As far as I'm aware, it's likely 1 lot forever. Going back to previous submission here, you can see that there was a lot approved here in 015 for the other son. The Blackwells have 2 sons that live locally, and the 3rd son has got another job up in Northern Ontario. So there's no intent to see additional development here. We acknowledge that the entire lands are designated residential, but the family has no interest in any further development. So with a comment provided by staff to take a holistic approach is really not in the best interest of the Blackwell farm or family, because they're in the business of farming. They're not in the business of developing lots. They're interested only in 2 lots, one that was granted in 015 and the other location that's shown here. So with that in mind, we are aware that there's questionable water supplies, but as indicated, the residents there where the Blackwells live, I believe they've got 2 wells. And likewise over here at the horse farm, they have a water supply for private and also for the horses, but other lots in the area have very questionable supplies. That was one of the reasons that this location was chosen for the proposed lot, was so that it'd be away from other existing residences and we could have the best chance to obtain water supply. I think, Mr. Chairman, that's the extent of the input right now. Pleased to answer any questions you may have.
Any member of committee with a question of our applicant? Member Miller, and Member Gatmore, you had a question of our planner that you may want to direct to. And I've got you on first, and then Member Miller will be second.
He answered it.
You didn't- Okay, fine. Member Miller?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through to Howard. Howard, a couple of questions. What you said 1.1 hectares, that's a good size lot. Why is it so big?
Well, to comply with the MDS formula,
To
you
get
need
beyond.
to have the ARC and the residence building site outside of the ARC.
Okay, and I know what you're saying. You're saying staff wants a holistic view, which you got to admit, that does make sense, and what you say makes sense as well. But where, it almost looks like you just kind of closed your eyes and just stuck a dart in there and seen where it come out, and because it's right in the middle, you know? If you were farming, you would kind of want it beside the other lot, so you know, you don't have to cut around it and all that. And it seems to be right on a bend. Is that an accurate representation up there?
It is. With respect to your comment, it looks like a dart was thrown at a dartboard. That's the farthest thing from the truth. The assumption is that it is over a hectare in size, but even if it's over a hectare in size, it's still likely that because the surrounding lands are going to continue to be farmed, that a portion of the farming may even extend onto the hectare and change of land area. So if you want to look here, you can see there's an existing entrance at, oops, my hand's a little shaky, at this location and an entrance here. Both of the proposed property lines are directly opposite the 2 entrances. So with that in mind, I've actually had discussions with the applicants about would they be willing to move the lot over here to the extreme east side, or would they move it over here? And the answer is no. They are wanting to locate the property in close proximity to the main family, but to still have sufficient distance between the neighbors and the proposed lot. The key in this is that I guess the other question I've asked of the applicants is, with the lot being here, wouldn't it be better in the corners from a farming perspective? And they've answered with a resounding no. Because they've farmed the land and know what farming is, they're satisfied that these areas here are still of sufficient size that it's useful for modern farming equipment to get in and turn around. So with that in mind, I have to respectfully disagree with your observation.
I appreciate your answers, Howard. Thanks.
Member Bell?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to Howard. For my education, and you may not be the right person to ask, Howard, you show 2 properties that are closer than the property you're proposing.
Yes.
Why do we go through the MDS exercise if we find we have 2 properties that are well within the 250-meter limit? Is there a good reason for that?
The reason is that under the MDS implementation manual, if there are 4 residences in closer proximity, then you can move it closer. But if there's only 2 or 3, it doesn't meet the MDS. So that reason, we have to increase the size from the standard acre or 0.4 hectares, which is the standard for the rural residential zone, to 1 hectare, and so that the building site can then be taken away. And if it's 1 hectare, The separation distance is from the barn to the lands being rezoned, not to the building site. But because you're dealing with over 1 hectare in size, you take it to the building site, and that's where the 260 meter separation distance comes in.
So when we approved those other 2 buildings, and I have no idea when we approved them, did we not address MDS? I mean, it's from my
Well,
education, I mean, it's got,
I'll-
not directly relevant.
Just a brief history, the MDS formula has evolved over time. It used to be that unless you, like this is going back a few years, but the MDS would be taken from the barn to the property line. Didn't matter the size of the building lot. That was evolved or changed roughly 010, 012, so that we can now have 1 hectare and the ARC can go through the proposed building lot as long as the building site is outside the ARC.
Yeah, I think I understand that, is that these other 2 buildings are absolutely within the ARC, and I'm just, for my education, maybe we can do it offline.
The only reason I mention the other 2 buildings is those existing buildings already constrain this horse farm, which means the horse farm can't expand any more than where it's at right now. And if this goes in, it's not going to impact the horse barn. So the horse barn is already constrained in the size that it can grow to because of these other 2 existing residences.
Okay, thank you.
Any other member of committee with a question for applicant? Seeing none, thank you.
Thank you.
Is there any member of the public would like to speak to this application? I'll ask a second time. Is there any member of the public would like to speak to this application? I'll ask you third and final time. Any member of the public would like to speak to this application? Seeing no one, we'll turn it back to committee. How does committee wish to deal with it? Member Coleman. Okay, seeking a seconder. Member Bailey, anyone want to comment on that amendment? Then I'll ask for approval of the amendment that it be sent to Ag Committee. All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Now, the move to receive as information, seeking a seconder for that. Member Bell, questions? Seeing none. All those in favor? Opposed? It's carried. We'll move on to B. Cliff Walsh, 7 Myerscroft Road, ZBA 29-19-DN, and I'll ask our planner, Dan, to present.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Planning staff have received a zoning bylaw amendment application for the property located at 7 Myerscough Road. The agent is J.H. Cahoon Engineering and the applicant is Cliff Walsh. And staff are recommending that this item be received for information purposes only. The subject lands are located within the hamlet or village of Birch, on the north side of Birch. The property also has frontage along Cockshutt Road and Myerscough. So as identified, the frontage approximately 150 meters along Cockshutt Road, 440 along Myerscough, and 240 meters along Birch Road, and the total area for the subject lands is approximately 20 hectares. A portion of the subject lands does fall within the orange area identified on the screen, which is our hamlet and village designation. And the portion outside of that area is designated agricultural. And we know we have a number of hamlets and villages throughout the county of varying sizes, and these areas are to accommodate a limited amount of residential, commercial, community, and industrial service-related uses. The current zoning on the property in its entirety is agricultural. The proposal is to rezone a portion of the subject lands from agricultural to residential hamlet and villages, RH, to facilitate new lot creation along the frontage of Cockshutt Road. As part of the application submission, the agent has provided a cover letter outlining the proposal, proposed site plan, and severance sketch. Some key items to consider: there is a watercourse traveling through the property, and the applicants have been in consultation with the GRCA. We're also looking at a possibility of establishing an easement to provide a shared access out onto Cockshutt Road to limit the amount of access points onto Cockshutt Road. As part of the severance application, we'll also be looking at providing a water supply, both in quality and quantity of water, site drainage and grading to show how the site will function. We'll be collecting parkland dedication fee for any new lots created, and archaeological consideration, which the agent will speak to in greater detail. In terms of next steps, the application will continue to be circulated and comments received, where staff will prepare a formal report, and notice will be given for a future public meeting where a recommendation will be presented by staff and a decision will be made. Happy to take any questions.
Any member of committee with a question of our planner? Member Gatward?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The driveway, or the entrance for this proposed new lot, is not on the lot, but next door. Is that because the sight lines aren't acceptable to staff? Or do they plan future lots and have that as the shared driveway?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I have not received the comments as part of the circulation from our engineering staff confirming where safe sight lines can be achieved. I'll let the agent provide the rationale for why the access is located where it is and why it is traveling across the subject lands.
Okay, thank you.
Any other member of committee with a question of our planner? Seeing no one, I'll ask the applicant or an agent of the applicant if they're here, if they'd like to present. Please come forward, state your name and address.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members. It's Rob Van Porten, J.H. Cahoon Engineering Limited. As noted by the planner, the purpose of the application is to seek a rezoning of a proposed lot to be located on Cockshutt Road. The overall property, or at least the frontage of the property, is designated in the Hamlet residential area, or Hamlet Villages. It is located within the settlement area of Birch. The subject lands which fronts onto Cockshutt Road has been the subject of previous severances and rezonings. I believe we've already done 3. This frontage is designated as Hamlets and Villages by the official plan, and the proposed lot creation and rezoning complies with the policies of both the official plan and zoning bylaw, or ultimate zoning bylaw. The proposed lot will have frontage on Cockshutt Road of approximately 50 meters and an area of 4,570 square meters, which exceeds the minimum requirements of the RH zone, which is 30 and 3,000. The severance application also seeks the creation of a right-of-way, as pointed out by the planner, to facilitate safe access to the proposed lot from Cockshutt Road, and that will be over the retained lands. This application does not create or seek further creation of a residential lot. In response to Councillor Gatward, The reason that there is a gap between what was previously created and what is being created now is that there's a significant archaeological find on that lot, and the owner is not proposing to develop that and disturb that find. Mr. Chair, I can respond to questions.
A member of committee with a question of the applicant? Member Gatward, you were satisfied with your question?
Yes, I guess I'd just like to clarify then. So the reason it's where it is and not within the frontage of the proposed lot is for safety, you said, and it's going to be an easement to the owner of the balance of the properties. And would that be used for a farm entrance as well?
Well, the balance, the non-frontage along Coxer Road is designated and zoned agriculture and will continue to be used in that purpose. You can't develop it for residential purposes. The only area that is left for residential purposes would be the frontage along Coxer Road. And as I indicated, the owner does not wish to disturb the archaeological find in that gap between the lot that was created several years ago and the one being created now.
Thank you.
Any other member of committee with a question of our applicant? Seeing none, thank you.
Thank you.
Is there any member of the audience who would like to speak to this application? I'll ask a second time. Is there any member of the audience who would like to speak to this application? I'll ask a third and final time. Is there any member of the audience who would like to speak to this application? Seeing no one, I'll turn it back to committee. How do you wish to deal with it? Member Coleman. Member Pierce seconds. Any other further questions or comments? Call the vote. All those to receive this information. Opposed? Is carried. And of course, this will go forward at a future meeting for final approval. Moving on to C, Stony Ridge Phase 3, Concession 3, part of Lot 6 and part of Lot 1 in St. George, PS 4-08-RA, and we're going to change planners at this point. Rajika, proceed when you are ready.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee. We have received an application for plan of subdivision, Stony Ridge Phase 3, submitted by J.H. Cajon Engineering. Staff's recommending that this application be received for information purposes only. The lands are located in St. George with about frontage of 97 meters on St. George Road and an area of 4.6 hectares. Just a bit of background on this application. The original plan of subdivision was submitted in 2008 with about 150 single-family dwellings. Due to servicing constraints, only Phase 1 with 44 dwelling units were approved in 2009. Subsequently, in 2015, applicant came forward with a Phase 2 proposal where 19 single-family dwellings and 2 blocks were approved. In 2017, the applicant rezoned the area, which is Phase 3 currently, to allow for single-family dwellings. And this is basically reactivation of the tabled file from 2009. So no additional dwelling units are being requested. The total of this subdivision will remain at 153. The lands are currently designated urban residential, and they are located within the prime urban settlement boundary of St. George. The designation allows for low, medium, and high-density residential uses. The lands are currently zoned R1 and special provision R1 for the corner lots where reduced exterior yard setback was requested when the applications came forward in 2017 for a zone change. The zoning does allow for single detached dwellings subject to the removal of holding provision. The holding provision was put in place because of the servicing constraints. Again, the proposal is for 63 single detached dwelling units on full municipal services. With respect to the supporting documents, there were a number of studies that were originally submitted by the applicant in 2009, and some of those studies were recently revised as well, and all these studies are being reviewed by our staff as we speak. So the key issues on this application is basically, again, servicing. The municipal class environmental assessment for water and wastewater in St. George is ongoing. The staff received comments on the water class EA recently, and we are still waiting from the ministry to respond on the wastewater class EA. So until the class EA is completed, we are unable to bring forward or complete any plans of subdivisions in St. George. So next steps, the application has been circulated to various departments and agencies for comments, and once we receive all the comments, there will be a recommendation, a report that will be presented to the committee for their consideration. That concludes my comments. Thank you.
Any member of committee, Member Bell?
Through you to Shika. I'm a little confused. My understanding when I joined council was that there was very limited capacity for new building in St. George. And I think you said that tonight. Why are we dealing with this now? Why don't we wait until we understand what the results of the EA will be and then bring this forward rather than have staff work on something at this point in time?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, there a bit of background in St. George, and I think that will help understand why we have this application in front of us today. A number of applications have been submitted and have taken 2 different steps. For example, Empire submitted a draft plan of subdivision in 2008. Losani Homes submitted their plan of subdivision in 2017. Both were appealed to Ontario or Local Planning Appeal Tribunal. We recently received a decision on the Empire plan of subdivision, and the Losani appeal is in front of LPAT. I believe the reason for this application in front of the committee is the applicant wanted to proceed around the same time as the rest of the applications. In addition to that, when in 2009 the applications were originally submitted, most of the engineering drawings and details were reviewed and accepted by staff. So this is kind of a shovel-ready site, and staff would rather prefer to work on this than the other subdivisions that I just mentioned, because they are directly related to, they need major trunks to go through their subdivisions for any sort of upgrades and stuff. So that is the reason why this is in front.
Thank you. And do you have any sense of when it would come, assuming we approve it or receive it for information, do you have any idea when you would bring it back for approval?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, unfortunately, that hasn't been decided yet.
Any other member of committee with a question of our planner? Seeing no one, is the applicant or agent of the applicant here would like to present? Please come forward, state your name and address, please, and proceed when you are ready.
If I may, to the chair and members and the audience, my name is Douglas Stewart. I'm with the I group, and I'm the planner on this proposal. I guess I'm here to advise you that if, and I think staff have expressed it quite well in their report and in response to what you heard tonight, This application has been around since the year 2008. All of the background review has been done. It's already, these proposed streets have been before all of those that are affected. It's a continuation of an existing street pattern. It is in St. George. It goes to the extreme edge of St. George. If there was an infill situation, this would be that. The proposal of single detached, this 63 townhouses, all conform to the existing bylaw. It would be the request from our group that upon completion of the review by staff and the external agencies, as well as input from the public, that our request to staff would be to bring this application here, because there are provisions in the bylaw, in that the bylaw would permit what's proposed. The terms of draft approval would ensure that it wouldn't proceed until there is the capacity, as well as the provision of holding would require another action of council, and it would make the plans equal in terms of when they can proceed. And in fact, I would argue that it's further than any other application that would come forward once the capacity has been found. I'm here to hear what concerns or questions you may have, but more importantly, what the residents may speak to, and that's fine.
Any member of committee with a question of the applicant? Member Gatward?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Has the developer ever considered a mixed use as far as the housing goes in this area, which the province is encouraging? I'm wondering about other more affordable options.
If I may, through you, reply. The proposal for single detached is consistent with what's been presented over a fairly long period of time. Yes, the provincial plan as well as the county plan speaks to providing a mix of housing. My comment would be that I believe it's more important to ensure that what is built is consistent with what is around it, as well as it was mentioned from staff. There are a number of other applications where that mix is being looked at, because those are applications which started after. I would suggest that single detached in this location under these constraints is the appropriate. And it would still conform to the provincial as well as the official plan
Thank
for the
you.
county.
Any other member Bailey?
I agree with the presenter that it's appropriate for this type of housing. I'm very familiar with where this is. I'm a little sorry that the setback isn't the same as the other part of the subdivision, just because it is completely opposite a cemetery, and it would have been nice to have some sort of a lane coming into the survey instead of having the side of someone's porch right to the road, so close to a beautiful church and a beautiful cemetery. I don't know whether, how sort of in steel this plan is, but if it could have had a setback, it would have suited the area much better. I think your housing is spot on, but I think that it looks a little greedy to the road.
Is there,
If-
I'm not sure there's a question, so.
No, if I might take your place for a moment. I'm very familiar with this, Mayor Bailey. and I've had a lot of discussion with the Spielzak family on this, and the potential for another entrance out onto St. George Road or Main Street North, whichever you prefer to call it, is in the works. But this isn't going to happen tomorrow. Any other questions of the applicant? Seeing none, thank you very much. I'll open this to the public. Is there any member of the public who would like to speak to this application? I'll ask a second time, is there any member of the public who would like to speak to this application? I'll ask a third and final time, is there any member of the public who would like to speak to this application? Seeing no one, I'll close this portion and turn it back to committee, and how does committee wish to deal with the application? Member Bell? Seeking a seconder, seconded by Member Miller. Any other further questions or comments from committee? Seeing none, all those in favor to receive? Opposed? This will go forward at a later date for final approval. We'll move on to public hearings under the Planning Act to consider staff recommendations. We'll start with A. Mark Summers at 223 Norwich Road, ZBA 22-19-RA, and I'll ask our planner, Rashika, to present.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee. The subject lands are located at 223 Norwich Road. The lands are designated agriculture in the official plan and currently zoned, temporary zone T62. The proposal is to amend the zoning bylaw to rezone the subject lands to allow for the existing kennel, which has 40 small dogs and 10 cats on a permanent basis. The temporary use was established on the property in 2016, and no complaints have been received since then. No concerns were raised through the circulation of this application. Staff is of the opinion that the proposal conforms to the policies of provincial policy statement and the County of Brant official plan. It's being recommended that the proposed rezoning be approved. That concludes my remarks. Thank you.
Any questions of the committee to our planner? Seeing none, is the applicant here would like to speak to it? Please come forward, or you're just here to answer questions if there are questions? Okay. Is there going to be questions of committee? No committee has a question, then I'll turn it over to the public. Is there any member of the public who would like to speak to this application? I'll ask a second time, is there any member of the public who would like to speak to this application? I'll ask a third and final time, is there any member of the public who would like to speak to this application? Seeing no one, I'll turn it back to committee for the committees to deal with it. Member Miller.
I'll move the recommendation, and we'll have to correct the former township of Brantford to former township of Burford.
Seeking a seconder. Member Bailey, seconds. Questions or comments? Seeing none, I'll call the vote. All those in favor to approve? Opposed? Is carried. This application will go forward to council approximately 3 weeks from this evening for final approval, sir. Moving on to B. Donald and Janet Bowman, 540 Baptist Church Road, ZBA 23-19-DN, and we're changing planners, and Dan is back. And whenever you're ready, Dan, you can present.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Planning staff are requesting for decision on a minor rezoning application for the property located at 540 Baptist Church Road. The subject lands are located on the north side of Baptist Church Road, west of Onondaga Town Line Road, and east of Brant County Road 22. The subject lands are currently zoned and designated agricultural with natural heritage area towards the frontage. The application proposes to rezone the retained farmland from agricultural to agricultural, site-specific A-9, to prohibit a dwelling as a permitted use. The rezoning application is required in order to satisfy a condition of consent, application B13 and B14-19, which were granted conditional approval at the July Committee of Adjustment meeting to sever the existing surplus dwelling and to create a new access easement to provide a secondary dry access to the dwelling that is located outside of the floodplain area. None of the agencies and departments circulated raised any concerns. Throughout the consent and rezoning application process, staff have taken the appropriate measures to ensure the consistency with provincial policy, conformity to official plan, and zoning bylaw compliance. And it's being recommended that the application be approved. This concludes my comments. Thank you.
Member of committee with a question? Member Bell?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, through you to Dan. When I was on the Committee of Adjustment, we had probably one of these every month. And it seems like we go through a process of saying, yes, you can have the severance, but everything else has to go from A to A9, just as a matter of course. I'm just thinking about the efficiency of our own process. Why do we have to bring it to this body when every time we go through the same process and say it's got to be A9? So at the point of severance, is it not possible to just have that as the equivalent of what we are doing today?
Through you, Mr. Chair, the A9 requirement, or to remove the ability to put a dwelling on the retained farmland, is a it's a provincial requirement from provincial policy. So the lands are either immediately consolidated with an abutting parcel, or measures be taken that a dwelling cannot be is not permitted on the retained farmland. So in our standard practice, we do amend the zoning bylaw, so that's why the application does come to Planning Advisory Committee through a minor rezoning application.
Yeah. So I mean, we're not actually discussing whether or not the severance is agreed. That was done by Committee of Adjustment. We're putting a rubber stamp on moving A to A9. I think we're wasting our time. I think we should give that to staff to deal with in future.
Any further questions of our planner? Seeing none, is the applicant or the agent of the applicant here would like to speak to this application? Please come forward. Or you're just here if there's questions? Well, I'll ask committee, or is there going to be any questions of committee of the applicant? I've scanned the committee twice. I don't see any questions, so I'll turn it back to committee. How do you wish to deal with this? Member Coleman.
So move the recommendation, Mr. Chair.
Seeking a seconder, seconding by Member Gatward. Any further questions or comments? Sorry. Is there any member of the public would like to speak to this application? I'll ask a second time. Is there any member of the public would like to speak to this application? I'll ask a third and final time. Is there any member of the public would like to speak to this application? Seeing none, now I can turn it back to committee. How do you wish to deal with it? Member Coleman moves. Member Gatward seconds. Any further questions or comments? Call the vote. All those in favor? Opposed? It's carried. This will go forward to the next council meeting 3 weeks from this evening for final approval, sir. Thank you. Moving on to C, Span Systems, 573 Middletown Road, ZBA 30-19-DN. I'll ask our planner to present.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Staff are requesting for a decision on a rezoning application for the property located at 573 Middletown Line Road. The application was originally presented and accepted for information purposes at the September Planning Advisory Committee meeting. As presented at the information meeting and outlined in the staff report, the application does propose to rezone a portion of the subject lands that are located within the employment lands designation from agricultural to heavy industrial M3. The rezoning is required to facilitate the development of the southern portion of the subject lands for the iSpan Building Systems facility. As outlined in the staff report, staff are recommending approval of the proposal to rezone the lands identified from agricultural to heavy industrial. For the committee's information, the agent had requested that relief from the required 50-meter setback from Middle Town Line Road be considered as part of the zoning bylaw amendment application. This request came as a result of a pre-consultation meeting held in early July that identified that the zoning bylaw requires structures within the M3 industrial zone that abut an arterial road, being Middle Town Line Road, to provide a minimum building setback of 50 meters. The applicants are requesting that a 30-meter setback be considered. Although staff do recognize receiving the request, a recommendation cannot be provided at this time, as no planning justification was submitted with the request in support of the setback relief. It should also be noted that public notices circulated did not include the setback relief request, and therefore planning staff are of the opinion that adequate notice as required under the Planning Act has not been given. As previously noted, planning staff are recommending approval of the proposal in a general sense to identify or to rezone the lands identified from agricultural to the M3 zone. And as it relates to an amended request, planning staff would recommend a deferral of the application to allow the agent to provide and staff time to review the required planning justification for any setback relief requested. This concludes my comments. Thank you.
Any member of committee with a question of our planner? Member Pierce?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you. So just for clarification, you're supporting this to approve it, but you want it deferred. Is that what I'm hearing?
Through Mr. Chair, the report as provided to you speaks to the application as it was presented at the information meeting, which is
Right.
from a straight agricultural to a industrial M3 zone. And the assumption there was that the development would meet all the requirements of the zoning bylaw, including the 50-meter setback and any requirements related. The applicants may request an amendment to the application, and so staff are in support of the application as presented in the report. The report is silent on the request for an amended application. So I'm just providing you with an update on how staff would recommend dealing with the application if an amendment was made, given that adequate notice had not been provided and planning justification was not provided, outlining why the reduction is required.
Okay, thank you.
Any other member of committee with a question? Member Gatward?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Through you to the planner, when the expansion on these lands comes forward, and the site plan, whether it's for the applicant or a new owner of the property, how will we ensure that the existing wetland feature is protected, which was mentioned in the GRCA comments?
Through Mr. Chair, any development on the subject lands would require site plan control application. As part of that application and as part of the rezoning application in front of you, the GRCA has been circulated and have provided comments identifying that there's a feature to be considered, and it would be considered in greater detail when a site plan that the applicants or that the agent's clients are comfortable with being submitted as part of a formal site plan application. At this time, the plans submitted are conceptual and are just for discussion purposes only, just to gauge a scale for the development, for the benefit of the committee and for staff reviewing the application. So staff are anticipating a formal site plan submission. It may look similar, it may look different.
Thank you.
Any other member of committee with a question of our planner? Member Bell?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Dan, I'm struggling with this. Can you just go one more time through the logic of that red line coming on there? And I don't see it in our pack. So can you just explain some of the timelines and logic behind it?
So when the applicants first provided the inquiry for, previous to a severance and the rezoning submission, the initial request from staff was provide us with a concept. What is this going to look like? What's the scale, building, built form, just to kind of give us an idea. The development proposed is only on the southern portion of the lands that have development potential, so we want to, and they are looking to sever these lands. Staff, again, looking at a holistic approach. What's the scale of the development, making sure that we draw that severance line in an appropriate place to allow for the proposed development to meet all the requirements of the zoning bylaw. So that's where the concept plan came. We provided, or we had a pre-consultation in July that touched on the severance application, the site plan control application, and the rezoning application. Through zoning comments, zoning identified that there is a 50-meter setback requirement. This was the concept provided as part of that circulation, so naturally zoning would identify any deficiencies provided on the plan. And this is quite a significant deficiency that should be identified. And it was following that pre-con meeting that the applicants had quite informally identified the request to amend the application to provide a 30-meter setback, whereas 50 meters is required.
So, again, for my understanding, we're approving a rezoning. We're not approving the positioning of that building. That's just conceptual. So if the applicant had put up a drawing there with a building that was moved 20 meters to the left, we wouldn't be in this discussion. So, I mean, just to be clear about what we're approving a rezoning, not the positioning of that building, and that's a secondary step. Am I correct? That goes through its own process?
That's correct. However, the applicants, as part of this Planning Act process, through the rezoning, they do have an opportunity to work in and to do a site-specific rezoning, essentially M3 with a site-specific to permit a reduced setback from the street. So they have the opportunity today to change the provisions on the site to allow for that building to be located closer to the street.
If we approve the rezoning today, they still can come back in a month's time and ask for that again?
Possibly through another separate application.
Yep, thank you.
Any further questions of our planner? Seeing none, is the applicant or an agent of the applicant here would like to present? Please come forward, state your name and address. Proceed when you are ready.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members. Rob Van Porten, Cahoon Engineering Limited. I won't go into the need for this rezoning and severance, other than it's for iSpan, who is a growing concern in the area. They have a plant on the opposite side of, on the south side of the road, and they need to expand onto the new site. They've entered into an offer to purchase land from Randy Wilson to purchase the 8 hectares of land. At our pre-consultation meeting, Mr. Chair, it was suggested by staff that perhaps we should expand the rezoning application to not only include the land being purchased by iSpan, but all the other lands that are designated employment on the west side of Middletown Road, owned by Mr. Wilson. And in July, mid-July, we made that request for an amendment to the application. At that same time, again mid-July, we requested a reduction in the setback from Middletown Road from the required 50 meters to 30 meters. And the primary reason, obviously, for this setback request is that it allows a better build-out of the site. 150 feet, 50 meters, is rather excessive. It should also be noted that other industries in the area, including the iSpan on the south side of the road, is in fact at 30 meters. Not 50 meters. There's another facility on the east side of the road, near the next intersection, I think it's the feed mill operation, that also has buildings approximately 30 meters from the road, so certainly a 50-meter seems excessive and not consistent with other developments in the area. As I said, we made this request in July, mid-July. When we talked to staff several days ago, or I guess it was yesterday, noting that this item was missed in the staff report, I was under the understanding that the principal reason why this was not coming forward was that they did not give proper notice that this was part of the request. And I must point out, Mr. Chair and members, that at the September PAC meeting, I certainly made this request known to the committee and the public, and therefore it was part of the overall record for this development. And as I said, as I understood, the principal reason why this matter was not put forward was that proper notice was not given for this modification to the M3 zone. And in considering that, Mr. Chair and members, I make note of the Planning Act, which in fact allows council to modify an application after considering whether further notice is required. And if that decision is made, in other words, if council planning committee accepts modification to the bylaw to deal with the 30-meter setback versus the 50-meter setback, you can make a decision that no further notice is required, and that decision is final and cannot be arbitrated. Those are the provisions of the Planning Act. And as I said, at the last meeting, I certainly made notice that this was a request. So it was a public notification per se, and nobody, including, I believe, council members, raised any concerns about that. As I indicated, or as indicated by planning staff, the project will be subject to site plan control. And in addition to normal considerations, additional buffering, landscaping, and perhaps a prohibition of parking within the 30-meter setback could be implemented, thereby ensuring that there is visual importance to Middletown Road versus the industry. As pointed out by the planner, for the purpose of conceptual planning, a concept plan was provided to the municipality. These are not final drawings by any means. They're representing on the screen, and they identify a factory area of about 9,400 square meters. I think there was one question about if there would be traffic from the south side to the north side. And we've been advised by ISPAN that that will not be the case. There will be two, although they'll be both operated by ISPAN, there won't be any traffic integration between the two sites. Mr. Chair, so in essence, I'm requesting that the Planning Committee accept our modification to the application from the 50-meter setback to the 30-meter setback on this arterial road, and that it be incorporated in the modification to the M3 zone as it applies to the strip of land on the west side of Middletown Road. We have made application for severance, and that will proceed in the normal course of events, presumably after consideration is given to the rezoning. Mr. Chair, I can respond to questions.
Member Pierce.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you, question in regards, and I know this is only a concept drawing up here, but if we're looking at that drawing, I guess it would be to the west of the building there, right on the far west side there. It looks as though there's parking spaces. Can you tell me what is in between those parking spaces and the proposed building? Would that be like a parking lot? Would that be grass?
It'd be pavement to allow for the circulation of transport trucks, et cetera, around the site.
Okay,
That would be enunciated and further delineated through the site plan control process.
perfect. Can you give me an idea, just roughly, how much space we're talking there? We're talking, 30, 40 meters?
In that area behind the,
Just roughly between the
Yeah.
parking spaces and the concept building there.
I think I know where your question is heading, Counselor. The concept plan also identifies the total ultimate build-out of the site. And that basically does include potential to build within that area that is, I'm going to call it buff color.
Okay?
That is not the total site that is being purchased. There is additional lands to the north.
No, and I appreciate that. Again, if you don't have it, that's fine. I'm just curious. By the looks of, if you're talking a 30-meter setback as opposed to a 50-meter setback from where that red line goes, I would suggest that's probably, 40 meters-ish on the other side.
I'm looking at the same plan, sorry, that you have, and I don't believe there is a dimension being offered, but I would suggest that is probably
Okay.
not, yeah, it probably isn't around the 50-meter
Okay, so,
range.
and I appreciate the fact of, you're gonna be having big trucks through there with big I-beams and such on it. But you also alluded to the fact that potentially, in future, that might be able to be built out that direction, possibly.
That's, I think, the intent.
Okay, which would reduce the space of allowing the vehicles to go through there. Again, where I'm going here is it possible to shift it? So,
Shift the
know?
building to the...
To the west.
To the west. I think that would have a detrimental effect on the ultimate development of the property because it would eliminate the potential for some build out to the west.
okay, I'll leave it at that.
Member LaFerriere?
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair. Is this part of the project that the federal funding was granted for to double the size of the workforce for ISPAN? Or is that a
I
separate?
apologize, I don't have that information. Somebody from ISPAN is sitting right behind you, maybe they could respond.
Because the projections there were for 20 jobs, but I see 140 parking spots. So I imagine that might be separate, but I'll chat with folks
Yeah.
after.
I don't know, sorry.
Member Gatward?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Do you know how high this building is going to be?
I don't believe they're in a position now to have finalized drawings, so I don't have that answer.
And I
It will be a
noticed,
standard industrial building, I'm sure.
and what is a standard industrial building then?
30 feet.
The height?
I think you can drive through the industrial area and view those for yourself.
Okay. My other question is, it's been suggested by the planner that the one driveway be moved across from another address. So there are homes across the road from this
Yep.
proposed building. Can you point them out for us on that diagram?
I believe there,
Oh,
I don't know where that goes far enough south, Dan. I can tell you that the residential properties are further to the west. There is no residential properties directly opposite the factory site.
and they were circulated on this application with a minimum 50-meter setback.
They would have been circulated for a straight rezoning of the property from agricultural to M3.
Right. Thank you.
Any other member of committee with a question of our applicant? Member Miller?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to Rob, site plan control, that would deal with outside storage of finished product, screening and screening.
Under site plan control, you certainly can provide a location for outdoor storage, yes.
And the reason I'm asking is the current operation on the south side of concession 3. If you drive along Middle Town Line Road, there's a lot of finished product just sitting there on the side of the road. And I know when you come off the 403, you're looking right at Walter Steele, the owner of Ice Band. And there's a lot of product there, and I had a good discussion with Marty Verhey about that. And I guess if you work in the industry all the time, you just don't see maybe what other people see. So that's why I'm bringing that hopefully to your guys' attention.
And I would agree. I went to the site this morning and noticed the same thing, and perhaps the approval of this development will alleviate some of those concerns. It's nice to see development, it's nice to see product being produced in the county.
No, it is. It absolutely is, and I'm excited about the expansion. It's just, I think we could do it nicely, that's all.
And those are items, certainly access and location for off-site storage, parking areas, landscaping, buffering, et cetera, are matters normally dealt with through site plan.
Okay, I'll leave it at that. Thank you, Rob.
Member Bell?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to the presenter, or the applicant. What is the consequence to you and your client if we approve the recommendation as written, rather than as you wanted amended?
Yeah, I think it's a matter of timing. You know, this application was submitted some time ago. We hope that matters that should be addressed were addressed. But I think it's a matter of timing. Everybody wants to get going on this project, and which is important to the county and the tax base. And you know, winter's coming.
Want to be more specific? How much time are you talking about? 1 month?
Well, I think if it was deferred, as suggested, which, by the way, was a total surprise to me until now, but I understand where staff is coming from. If it was deferred, presumably it would be deferred for one cycle, which I've been advised is an unacceptable time frame from the client, the owner, and the applicant's standpoint.
I'm struggling a bit. I mean, if we were to approve the rezoning, I'm struggling to know what that will do to your timeline.
I think you have the ability under the Planning Act to make the amendments to the application without further notice. So, I mean, the option is there for this committee to make that decision. It's totally, within your purview to determine that adequate notice was given, irrespective of the fact that it did not include the setback request. You just have to make, I have to point out again that certainly in the public forum, this was all discussed, so I don't know I don't know the need from your perspective for a deferral. Obviously, I'm not sitting around the table, I'm standing here, but I see alternate process that can take place.
Mr. Chair, could we just get clarification from planning staff as to the point that Mr. Van Porten's making? Is this a decision that we can take?
Yes. Member House?
Through you, Mr. Chair. So we can take that step, and while the proposed amendment was mentioned in this room, it wasn't circulated to the public through the normal process. And we have a responsibility to the public to make sure that we're making them aware through every step that is normally taken. I think that's where we get held up. So,
And that's, I understand your dilemma, absolutely.
Any other member of committee with a question for applicant? Member Bell?
Yeah, I actually would like to hear from the planning staff on this point.
Through Mr. Chair, the planning staff would appreciate the interpretation of the powers of the committee to amend an application. Planning staff would just put an emphasis on that that change or that amendment should be considered minor by the committee. You know, typically, it could be an adjustment in a number. However, this, you know, planning staff would not consider the change minor, and that adequate notice hasn't been given the fact that we are adding an additional provision to the request.
Any other member of committee with a question of our applicant? See, I'll get to him. Right now, I'm dealing with committee. Any other member of committee with a question of our applicant? Seeing none, thank you very much.
Thank you.
I may call you back. Any member of the public would like to comment on this application? I'll ask a second time, is there any member of the public would like to speak to this application? Please come forward, state your name and address. No, I would prefer if you came to the podium, sir.
Randy Wilson, the owner of the property. My home address is 34 4th Concession Road, Burford. A couple of things. For one, obviously, as the owner, I would not like to see this deferred, but, you know, we have to abide by the decision that you make here. The other, maybe more startling, and I apologize for my attire, I was not notified of the meeting tonight, and I seem to think that's a little odd since I'm the owner of the property and didn't receive notice. So I had another appointment, and I was dressed as I am now, and decided I would slip by the office because I thought the planning meeting was on the first Tuesday of the month, and lo and behold, I'm correct. But I was a little disappointed that I hadn't received notice of the meeting myself. So that's really my main comment, and obviously I would prefer it not to be deferred.
Thank you. Our Director, Rob Trotter, would like to comment. Rob, I'll call you forward. Yeah, I'll let him comment, then I'll go back.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Through you to committee. It's not often I walk up here with my planning act, but I did tonight. The consultant working for the applicant in this case talked about the committee having the ability to make this decision anyway, despite the fact that the notice was given in a manner that wasn't exactly as they had requested in their application. It is true, the committee does have that authority to do that. I'll read very briefly. Where a change is made in a proposed bylaw after the holding of a public meeting, which is happening tonight, the council shall determine whether any further notice is to be given with respect to a proposed bylaw, if they want to make a change to it. So you can make that change tonight. It's never a good idea to make a change to an application where there's a notice issue. I was talking with the solicitor about that. You have the authority to do it. I think the committee may want to take into consideration the members of the public that are or are not here tonight. We have heard it in an information meeting, so it's really up to you. You do have the authority to do that. Because we did provide sufficient material to people to let them know what was happening with this application. I'm a bit at odds as to understand why the owner of the property wasn't given notice of that application. That's a little bit odd, and perhaps Dan, if he's been looking through the notes there, he might have an answer for that. But because that seems very odd, especially given the fact that he's also an owner across the street. So he's also within 120 meters of the subject property because he owns land directly across the street as well. So that's very, very odd. So I'll leave that for the committee to mull over. If you feel that the notice issue is large enough that you feel that it should be deferred and recirculated with the proper information, you can do that. Also, or alternatively, the committee can make a decision to amend it to grant the site-specific zoning bylaw amendment from the road as well.
Any member of committee with a question of Mr. Trotter? Mr. Howes?
So just to be clear, we can approve the rezoning and defer the 30 to 50 meter issue.
I would suggest if you're going to defer it, you defer everything, and you bring it all back
Pricey,
with the
okay.
proper setback and everything. But alternatively, you have the ability to modify it tonight and approve it.
Okay, thank you for that clarification.
Member Atwood?
That was similar to my question, Mr. Chair. Defer as amended. So deferring it and recirculating it to let the public know there's been an amendment from 50 to 30 meters, and bring it back in a month and see if there's any objections.
Correct.
So we could easily do that without going through a two meeting cycle if we approved it and then did an amendment as a separate application.
Yeah, we could bring it back to the November Planning Advisory Committee meeting.
Thank you.
Any other questions over Mr. Trotter? Seeing none? Oh, Member Miller?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, we're a little devoid of information on this whole 30 meter, 50 meter because we didn't know about it. What's the purpose of a 50 meter, say, versus a 30 meter? Is it because it's on the road that it's on, or explain that?
Yeah, typically when you've got a major arterial road, you have an increased setback because you never know at what point in time you may need additional road widenings, additional widenings for easements for utilities, things like that. So that's why on major roads often you have a wider setback. That's the reason that I've seen over the years, and I would suggest that that's how that bylaw got established at that distance.
Okay, and like just from my perspective, I think 30 meters should be more than sufficient for easements and whatnot. So okay, I appreciate that answer. And second question for Rob, Mr. Chair. I'm a big believer in giving the public notice, but aren't we doing that anyways? Because I mean, we're not giving final approval to this, even if we were to pass it with the amendment. That doesn't come till the end of the month. Could that not be our?
Well, through you, Mr. Chairman, I believe that's why the wording of the act is exactly the way it is. Where a change is made in a proposed bylaw after the holding of the public meeting, which is tonight. So that gives you that opportunity to make that change, if you feel it's reasonable and you feel it's.
Okay. That's how I feel, but I wanted to ask you, so I appreciate the answer. Thank you.
Member Chambers? Oh, I thought I saw you wave at me. Member LaFerriere?
Just process question. Through you, Mr. Chair, if the agent of the applicant had notice, which he clearly did because he had a report ready, then that would serve as giving the applicant notice as well, would it not?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, I would tend to agree with that, except that the owner owns the land across the street too.
Well, he may not have checked his map. I can't answer that, but
Yeah,
we have given notice to the agent of the applicant, which is,
Yes, I believe he's in attendance tonight.
and
so,
had a
yeah.
full
Yeah.
prepared report, so just
Absolutely.
clarifying.
Yeah.
Any further questions of Mr. Trotter? Seeing none, thank you.
Okay.
Going back to the public portion of this application, I'll ask a second time, is there any member of the public who would like to speak to this application? I'll ask a third and final time, is there any member of the public who would like to speak to this application? Seeing none, Mr. Van Porten would like to come back to answer a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members. Just two important points. The property owner on the opposite side of Middletown Road is in fact Mr. Wilson. He owns large tracts of land on both sides, which are also and by the way, that's also designated industrial, employment. So Mr. Wilson is in fact the only person that is affected by the setback reduction. The other aspect, Mr. Trotter pointed out that one of the principal reasons for the 50-meter setback is to allow for potential road widenings under site plan control. The municipality, and I guess the severance, the municipality can, at no cost, get the necessary road widenings to facilitate future expansions of their roads. So the ability is there under a process without having to deal with the 30 meters. And by the way, if a road widening was required under either the site plan control or severance process, the 30 meters would be calculated from the widened portion of the room.
Thank you.
Excuse me. So those are the two matters that I wanted to specifically address.
Thank you. I'm going to turn this back to committee. Before I turn it back to committee, got a recommendation before us. But we've also got a request to change the setback. So I'm going to ask committee, is there any member of committee who wants to change the setback? And I'm going to deal with that first. If there's no member of committee moving to change the setback from 50 meters to 30 meters, I'll move on to the recommendation that is before you. And if you approve that, and the applicant then wants to change from 50 to 30, it's my opinion that he'll have to submit a separate application, which he has time to do that, because his final approval will not happen until the council meeting 3 weeks from this evening. So that's my ruling. Is there anyone who wants to change at this point in time the setback from 50 meters to the requested 30? Member Bell, are you making that a motion?
Yes, I am.
Okay, seeking a seconder. I don't see a seconder, so that motion.
I thought we would get the motion.
Just a second. If I'm asking for a motion to change the setback from 50 meters to 30 meters, and Member Bell has made that recommendation. I'm asking, is there a seconder for that motion? I'll get to you. Okay.
A point of order,
Now-
Mr. Chairman.
Now,
I really am confused as what you're doing here.
then
You're putting a motion on that's not here, like, I disagree with the process that you're putting forward. What should be done is a recommendation put forward and then amended if required, and that's the way to do it. But you're asking to do something. I haven't had a chance to speak to the resolution either way yet, and now we're in a motion. I disagree with what you're doing, and I think it procedurally is incorrect.
Well, I'm going to disagree with you because the motion to change from 50 to 30 would be the amendment to the recommendation. And before you can approve the recommendation, you have to approve the amendment first. And that's what I'm attempting to do. Maybe I'm using different words than you would have preferred to use, Mr. Chambers. Member Gatward, I've got it on the floor from Member Bell and Member LaFerriere to change from 50 to 30 as an amendment. As an amendment.
So the amendment, Mr. Chairman, proposing to change the zoning on a portion of the subject lands from agriculture to heavy industrial and to reduce the setback from 50 meters to 30 meters. Is that the amendment for the recommendation?
No, the recommendation is to change the setback from 50 meters to 30 meters. Member Chambers.
Mr. Chairman, you're trying to amend a resolution that's not even before us. So you can't amend something that's not before us. You have to put the resolution forward, and then you have an amendment to the resolution. You've got the cart before the horse.
Member Miller.
Mr. Chair, that's exactly what I was going to say. We can't, we don't have a motion before us to amend. It's just that simple. We have to have a motion on the floor, then we can bring in an amendment, but there's no motion on the floor.
I apologize for putting the cart before the horse. If this committee would like to approve the cart, and then we'll approve the cart, and we'll see if we can get the horse in front. So, Member Bell, Member LaFerriere, if you would conveniently withdraw your motion and seconder, I'll try and appease everybody on this committee by getting the cart there. Member Miller.
I'll move the recommendation to approve.
Okay. Seeking a seconder, and I have a seconder, Member Coleman. Is there any comments or questions on it? Member Chambers is now going to try and put the horse there.
I would like to speak to the amendment to approve the application. And I will add my comments with regard to the request for the setback to be changed from 50 to 30, which I believe is what is before us.
That's not for us. Yeah.
We haven't amended it yet.
Okay. Then what I will do is first speak to the motion and then propose an amendment.
Proceed.
I'm in total in favor of this application. We have had 2 public meetings now, and there has been no public arrive to either support or not support, which is a good sign, because if people were against this, the room would be filled. In my opinion, the reason they're not against this is because just on the other side of the road, this company has been carrying on business for many, many years and has not been the subject of any complaints that I know of. And it is an employer in the county, and it is a good employer in the county, and they are wishing to expand not only their operation, but expanding employment opportunities. And they are also expanding our industrial assessment if they proceed to have the approval to move forward, which is a good thing. And I don't think that's the issue before the committee, because I'm sure that everyone will support the increased industrial assessment on a company that has been a good corporate citizen over the years. Now, I'm going to propose amendment that the application be approved with a 30-foot setback. Meter setback.
Is it yours? Just, you're confused too.
And
Mr. Chair.
I will, if there's a seconder, I would like to speak to that.
I will second.
Seconded by Member Bell.
Speaking to that amendment, we're talking about a distance the width of this room. As the presenter outlined, there are operations and buildings along that road, just to the north, or to the south, and to the north, that are within the 30-meter setback. So it's not something that is not being done already, and that's on the word of the applicant. Secondly, the lands between the, if the picture was up there of the proposed, the schematic of the site plan, there's ample room for buffering between the corner of the proposed building and the road. So if it's a matter of visual, there can be site plan adjustments to correct that. With regard to widening the road, I don't think you'll see that road widened for many, 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 many years. So I don't think that's the issue, and that was addressed by the applicant as well, in that there are there would be ample room for that. The issue of public notice, which I think is pretty much the only issue, the people haven't been told. Well, as Councillor Miller suggested, the final approval of this is at the end of the month, and if there's any objections, we will hear about that, and hopefully by the end of the month, and we can reject the amendment at that time if necessary. But I don't think that's going to be necessary. This room is not filled. Nobody has made an indication that they're against this application, and why should they be? So, Mr. Chairman, I support the application wholeheartedly. It's good for the county, and I support the request for the 30-meter setback, because it's consistent with which has been already there to the south and the north, and there's ample room for buffering if need be, and the site plan can accommodate that.
Member House.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I agree that this will be good for the county. I'm hung up on one word, and that's circulation. And the circulation to the public of the 30-meter adjustment. But I'm understanding, I think, from Rob, that if we did circulate to the public in the normal radius, that the only people, Randy Wilson's the only person that would receive those applications. I'm just asking, can staff clarify that? Because that makes all the difference in the world. If there's no other neighbors to circulate this to, then I stop being worried about circulation.
Dan?
Through Mr. Chair, I have the circulation notice list. These are the properties within 125 meters that are required circulation, property owners within 25 meters, or 125 meters. And our planning administrator who would coordinate the circulation has identified that 13 notices were prepared and circulated. Mr. Wilson's name is on here a few times. However, only one, a few times at the same address, so only one notice was sent to Mr. Wilson.
Okay, that aside, so there are other names on there besides Randy Wilson. Okay, thank you.
Member Miller?
Mr. Chair, I'm going to support the amendment, and I don't take the notice lightly. I think that's important. However, this isn't a controversial application because we didn't receive any public input. There's nobody here this evening from the public other than the applicants. So, given the desire of the applicant to proceed immediately, they don't want it deferred, they said that. Given the importance of this particular industry to the county, not only as a ratepayer, but also as an employer, I would strongly encourage that committee to support the amendment.
Member LaFerriere.
Through you, I would also buttress that by saying that if there was some groundswell of community against this, they could come to the next council meeting and speak to it, and we could pull it if need be. And I don't see that happening, to be frank, so I will support it as well.
Any other member of committee wants to comment? And much to the disagreement of Member Chambers, I'm going to call for approval of the amendment first. All those in favor of the amendment? Opposed? Seeing none. I'll call for the approval of the recommendation as amended. All those in favor? Opposed? It is carried. This will go forward to the next council meeting for final approval. Moving on to consent items. Consent items to be approved, there are none. Consent items to be received, there are none. We have a committee report before us. How does the committee wish to deal with the committee report? Moved by Member Coleman and second by Member Pierce. Questions or comments on that committee report? Member Pierce.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is the Heritage Committee one.
Yes.
If I could, I'm trying to understand the first recommendation there. And even in the minutes, it doesn't really give an understanding as to why members' costs related to the designation of 240 Bethel Road be reimbursed up to $50. I'm trying to understand what were the costs.
I will attempt to get an answer for you. And I will refer to Member McAlpine, who was the chair of the Heritage Committee. Could you, Member McAlpine, respond to Member Pierce?
They did a number of reports in regards to this for photocopying, travel, various items like that. They're also looking into a new process that they went down to the Norfolk County in regards to how we're approaching this now. And so we just wanted to reimburse them for basic costs in regards to that. So.
Member Howes, you'd like to respond to that also?
Yeah, if I could just support that a little bit. We're not talking about all of the members of the Heritage Committee. We're talking about 2 members of the Heritage Committee, which did a lot of driving and a lot of visits to this site, and it wasn't requested from them, it was requested from someone else in the committee that says, you know, these people drive all over the place in support of the activities of the Heritage Committee to see sites. And in this specific case, we supported the idea of offering to reimburse some of their fuel costs.
Okay, that's a little more clarification as that it's two people. It's still a little odd, but that's a little better than the whole committee. But anyway, I'll take that for what it is. Thank you.
You had a further question I thought you had two questions. Sorry? You're
No, I was
satisfied?
just looking for clarification about that recommendation as to what it was about, because even in the minutes, it doesn't really give any context.
Member Chambers?
Just my question would be, is the property owner in support and aware of this request for designation?
I'll refer to Chair McAlpine.
They actually brought it forward to us to have it designated, and the property was originally kept in well regard, and they've only enhanced it since then. So they've gone above and beyond anything we would expect. So.
Member Gatward?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Through you to the clerk, do we not pay mileage expenses for our volunteer committee members?
Through you, Mr. Chair. No, they're in the remuneration bylaw. There are 2 local boards that receive some sort of compensation or mileage, that is being the Committee of Adjustment and the Police Services Board. No other advisory committee or volunteer board receives any measure of remuneration for their services. It's simply on a volunteer basis, yes.
For mileage, thank you.
So the recommendations before us, how does the committee wish to deal with it? I have a mover and a seconder. All those in favor? Opposed? Is carried. We move on to 11. 11A, we have a staff report before you. The recommendation says that we received this. If anybody, Jennifer is ready to answer questions, so if any member has questions, Jennifer is here to answer them. I wasn't even going to call you up if they approved it, Jen. You're here. Any member of committee with questions of our senior policy planner, Jennifer Moyer? Member Miller?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to Jennifer. A lot of what's going on with Bill 08 is going to obviously impact our official plan. In your report, you said update our official plan to meet the July 1st, 2022 date. And you're going to start, plan's going to be starting on the official plan this fall. Does it have to be submitted by July 1st, or does it have to be approved by the province by July 1st, 2022?
Through you, Mr. Chair, to the member of committee. So we've met with MMEH already throughout the summer months, and the growth plan has to have conformity to the official plan by July 1st, 2022. But according to the Planning Act process, Section 26, we need up to 6 months to give MMEH sort of approval to go through the plan, and it has to be approved by the minister. So MMEH has told us roughly around February of 2022, we should be submitting the official plan as a final document approved by this committee and council by around that time to give them enough time for approval.
For July 1st, 2022.
Is the conformity date to the growth plan.
Yeah, okay.
That's correct.
Thank you.
Member Gatward?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. D, for rural communities, the modifications listed protect prime agricultural areas. However, they're saying that they're providing more flexible sewage and water servicing policies. And that would be within settlement boundaries? Is that correct? As I'm thinking of one particular development that's being proposed and come before this committee, and it has a unique servicing proposal for it. Thank you. And by the way, great report.
So,
Anyone else with, member, yeah, Member Bell?
I just wanted to
Oh, I'm sorry.
all right, through you.
You concluded with the great report, and you were satisfied.
That's fine. Thank you very much. But through you, Mr. Chair, to the member. So the way the PPS has been laid out, so the province through their consultation process has done this, so it's attached to their report on the committee as a link. So they've done this sort of placemat approach, which is the buckets, and that's what the member Gatward's talking about. So the one that is in that bucket list is supporting rural, northern, and Indigenous communities. So the way the province has done their consultation is sort of lumping these themes together. But in the actual provincial policy statement, they're laid out differently in terms of infrastructure requirements, servicing, growth patterns. A lot of it is conformity to the growth plan itself. And that's what sort of, and also the Bill 108, More Homes, More Choice Housing Supply Strategy. So that's really what the province is updating right now, and that's what they want us to conform to. So in terms of the rural servicing, we have a servicing hierarchy right now in the province and for us, for settlement areas. So that's part of the infrastructure updates for the provincial policy statement. So for rural communities, we've got different areas like settlement areas, which will have full or semi-partial servicing. Then in our rural hamlets, we'll have mostly private servicing. So the updates really to the PPS is to acknowledge the fact that we have to look at hierarchy and land needs assessment and where we direct growth. So it's looking at different opportunities for rural communities. The ministry clarified this policy when we were in consultation, because they said really what this is about is all those areas in northern Ontario that really don't have a lot of servicing. So they're trying to give them different options because they're not connected to water, they're not connected to big systems. So they're trying to give them more flexibility in terms of different sort of servicing mechanisms that they can look at. So it wasn't necessarily directed to those around the Golden Horseshoe, but mostly in northern Ontario. So, thank you.
Member Bell?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to Jennifer. When you came, and I forget how many months ago now it was, Rob introduced you and he said you were going to work on the growth management strategy. So my question is, how does all of what you've written in this report impact your thinking about a growth management strategy? And maybe at the same time you could tell us where we are with the growth management strategy.
Through you, Mr. Chair, and to the member. So, yep, as part of this report, and next month at a special meeting of Planning Advisor Committee, we're going to be doing our official plan launch. And part of that municipal comprehensive review, which is part of the growth plan implementation, and part of our actual official plan, is our municipal comprehensive review process, which includes land needs assessment and the growth management strategy. So our consultant, Watson Associates, has already started that, and they're looking at all our land needs, our housing typologies, employment lands, intensity, densification targets. So we have a contract with them, and they've actually already started. So.
Yeah, that's good to hear, because I don't want to be in a position where our ability to manage is just following the rules. I'd like to think there's some discretion that we can apply, some leadership we can apply, some direction we can apply as the leaders of the community. Thank you.
Member Chambers?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, to Jennifer, I'm just wondering if you would comment or elaborate a little bit on the mineral aggregate policies. Specifically, I'm looking at the paragraph there that says various changes to mineral aggregate policies such as operations to use rehabilitation plans to demonstrate that extraction will have no negative impacts. And it goes on to say that extractions are going to be allowed in natural heritage features outside the Greenbelt, and specifically something I've never heard of before, but a new vertical zoning policy for below water table extractions. Can you just elaborate, maybe explain what a vertical zoning policy is and what it'll look like, and whether this is going to impact our aggregate resources conundrum that we seem to have?
Through the chair to the member. So there's a couple things talked about for mineral aggregates, and there's just recently been some changes to the Mineral Aggregate Act, and I believe that we've been asked to provide a report about that in the next month or so, which we'll all be doing. So the first part for the mineral ag piece is that really it's under this bucket called reducing barriers and costs that the province has done. So, which is interesting for municipalities. So the first piece is that to allow extraction and natural heritage features. So whether, depending on where you sit, that doesn't make some people happy because it's allowing it to, go into our natural areas, but proving no negative impacts. So that's done through the studies. The second piece was actually the vertical zoning, and so that has to do with the municipality. When you have an aggregate expansion or any aggregate act application, we have to have our official plan amendment or zoning bylaw in place for them to proceed. So the vertical zoning actually had to do with below water table applications. So if you're changing your application to go below water table, so that's the vertical zoning piece. So the municipality actually will have more sort of say in terms of the zoning piece. So hydrogeological assessments would have to be done. The question that was raised, though, is who at the municipality would review that. It's a decent proposal to allow more sort of limits on below water table for the zoning, but it means that someone would have to review that in terms of a zoning bylaw amendment. So it means probably hiring a hydrogeologist to look at that if that's what the municipality would like to do. So, I mean, some of these policies are, positive, and there's some decent changes, and it's aligning with the growth plan. It just depends on sort of where you're coming from and what you're looking at, right? In terms of the actual effect on the municipality, so.
Just to that, through you, Mr. Chair, could we contract out that work? Because I doubt we'd have the full-time equivalent need.
So through you, Mr. Chair. So right now, no, we don't have a hydrogeologist on staff, and we also don't have hydrogeological guidelines here. It depends on who can do it. In a lot of municipalities, the conservation authorities have them on retainer. So that's something that we could have a discussion with GRCA about, because they do have hydrogeologists on staff. They help us out a lot with the source protection piece as well. But otherwise, if it would be a big application that the municipality would have to look at, I mean, it's just like any application or that goes to the LPAT. We'd have to hire like a peer reviewer type thing or have someone look at it in-house.
Anyone else with a question of Jennifer? Seeing none, I'll need a mover and a seconder to receive. Moved by Member Coleman, second by Member Pierce. Any further questions? Call the vote to receive. All those in favor? Opposed? It's carried. Thanks, Jen. There are no communications listed. Other business. Member Miller has two.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And this is, I get a question for staff. I don't know if they, who could answer this, but the hog barn on the 5th concession out in Burford was in an LPAT hearing, and I think the applicant has withdrawn, but nobody got any notification or email or anything like that stating that. And I'm just wondering, who would be responsible for notifying all the people that signed up so diligently and gave their contact information?
I'm sorry, I do not have an answer for that, Member Miller. Apologize.
I'm hoping
But I
somebody
would
from...
think that if an individual withdrew, he would notify his compatriots that he was withdrawing. So my opinion, the onus would be on the applicant that withdrew to tell his... Well, you can, but he asked me a question, I'm trying to answer. But staff is coming up.
Mr. Chair, through you, the solicitor can provide that information in the in-camera portion of the meeting.
Okay. Second item.
Okay, fair enough. In the last budget, we approved a, I don't know what the title was, a liaison for planning. So when an application would come in, somebody would could guide applicants or applications through the process. Did we hire somebody for that position?
Yes.
And who is that?
CAO's come to tell you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and through you, the position was hired, I think, about 2.5 months ago. It's, the person's name is Delia Reish, and actually she's liaising regularly, maybe much to the chagrin of the planning department, but we have a good dialogue going on. She's actually picking up more files every day. And so I think that program's coming together nicely. We've got some, I think, some rough edges to sort out, but I do believe it's going to come together nicely, and it's going to work fluidly for business owners. And I believe she actually has helped the iSpan group that was just here through this process.
So if we know somebody that's having an issue or not quite sure where to go, is it just for planning applications, or is it for building applications as well?
Through you, Mr. Chair, they would both, any business interested in development activities here in the county, planning, building, that person can help them through the process, as well as connect them to other services the county offers.
Okay, thank you, Michael.
Anything else? General Manager's update.
Thank you. Through the chairman to committee, I have kind of a fun update, just one notice. It's actually a boat planning notice. I've been told that, and I can't take credit for any of this work, this is purely Mr. Trotter and his planning staff that have done this, but I've been told that these are our current notice of planning application signs that you may be seeing around the community. They look very much like a utility sign, and they're quite small, and I'm happy to share with you that our planning area is reformatting these signs. They're much larger. They're going to be much larger. They're branded with the County of Brant symbol, so you will know and the community will know that is our planning applications that are moving forward, and there's lots more room on the sign to provide good information to the community. So you can expect to see new signs, larger signs in the new year for a planning notice. Other than that, I'm here for any questions.
Member Pierce.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you, that's great. Will they be orange as well?
That is a very good question. I'm not sure. I'm assuming they'll be orange or yellow or some bright color. We also have talked about a streamlining process for commercial, retail, industrial applications. So those applications may be a different color, like green or something.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Member Gatward.
Thank you. I'm happy to see a larger sign. I'm wondering how, normally they're hooked to a tree or a fence post. Are those signs going to be made out of material that won't flap around in the wind and get ripped off in the wind?
Through you to Councillor, that is another good question. Yes, we're going to be looking at some sturdier material than currently we have, and potentially looking at maybe providing customers with stakes and that sort of thing so that they're not placed on trees.
Thank you.
Member Bell.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to our General Manager. At the last meeting we had Grand View Homes talking about a structure that might be 45 meters tall. It excited a lot of interest in the community. Can you update us on how things are going in terms of discussions with that company? And when we might see them back at this committee?
To committee, I don't know all of the details of every application yet. I'm working on it, but I'll ask Mr. Trotter to provide that information.
Thanks, Pam. Through you, Mr. Chairman. The planner on the file, Marcus Davidson, is working with the applicant. We anticipate that something coming back in December at the earliest, because we're currently in negotiations with them and discussions with respect to the height of that building for sure.
Any other member of committee with a question for managers? Seeing none, thank you very much. We'll need a motion to go in camera. Moved by Member Pierce, second by Member Coleman to go in camera. And at that point, I'm going to call Ruchika, all in favor. Ruchika to join me at the table here.